G'day, Professor Joseph Drew. I'm here to update you on the most recent inflation figures and tell you what my outlook is for the rest of the year and why I believe that inflation is here to stay and it will be increasing. And finally, what this means for your local government. So please stay tuned all the way through to the end of the video. So it's important to know what's happening with inflation around the world because this is a global phenomena. It's been exported principally by the US to the rest of the world, and some absolutely horrific stories in countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka. But let's look at the major economies we deal with. America, inflation 9.1%. The United Kingdom 9.4%. The Kiwis 7.3%. And our inflation figure came out yesterday at 6.1%, which doesn't sound too bad in a relative sense. However, can I please point out that inflation for food and beverages was 5.9%. Inflation on housing was 9%. Inflation on transport was 13.1%. These are incredibly high numbers, and the things that I just noted are what we call non-discretionary goods. You have to buy food, you have to have accommodation, and you have to have transport. So the real effect on most Australians is much higher than the 6.1% figure might suggest. So I think it's unreasonable to think that our inflation will continue to lag the rest of the world. We did all the same things that the Americans and the Kiwis and the Poms did, so we should expect the same outcomes. There's a few reasons why it hasn't hit us so hard yet. One being the EBA, the Enterprise Bargaining Agreements. Most Australians work under them. They're 3-year agreements. Because of them, wages haven't increased yet. As those new agreements are negotiated, wages will go up and costs of goods will have to go up to compensate the employers for paying these higher wages. Another reason is we've been working off inventories because we are long distance from major producers of things and we import most things. We had large inventories. As those inventories are used up and we get new stock in from overseas, we'll have to pay higher prices for that stock and they'll be passed on to consumers. So I'm expecting inflation will be sticky. It'll probably be stickier for longer in Australia because of those EBAs and because of those lags. But there's still a lot of inflation pressures out there. There's friendshoring. This is the movement to bring industry back from China back to Japan and the USA and the like. Particularly critical industries such as chip production. Now that sounds all nice and good. However, the reason why these industries were offshored in the first place is because it was more efficient to do so. We could produce them at cheaper costs over in China. If we move them back to friendly nations, that's going to result in an increase to production costs, which is going to ultimately be passed on to the consumers' higher inflation. Green energy. It's also all well and good. A lot of people care about the environment and want action, decisive action to be taken on the environment. However, doing so comes with a cost. It costs money to build these wind turbines. We're also shifting a lot of our economic investment from other productive assets into these green technologies. As a result, other areas of the economy will suffer while we're focusing on these. As a result of the significant investments into green energy, we will see energy costs continue to rise because green energy does cost more and old energy sources aren't going to be explored and open and exploited, whilst the narrative is still about how oil and coal are dinosaur industries and they're going to die. No one's going to invest in those industries. That's one reason why we have a supply shortage at present. We've still got supply disruptions. We've still got lockdowns in China and other countries. Productivity has fell through the floor. I was in a cafe the other day with some colleagues and we were commenting on how bad service has got and how slow everything is. People didn't work for up to a year in some of their states in Australia. They got used to not working and they still haven't adjusted to going back to high levels of productivity. A lot of employees still refuse to go back to the workplace. And yes, they can work from home, but most people aren't anywhere near as productive at home as what they would be in the workplace. Because of low productivity, you're going to have more inflation pressures because it's going to cost more for staff to produce the same amount of goods. In addition, we've got higher sick leaves. I read a report about the high number, 110,000 people, I think, in the UK on extended sick leave because of long COVID. In addition, you've got also people exploiting sick leave. They call it a COVID vacation, where you can say I've tested positive and get 7 days off, no questions asked. So all these things are increasing labour costs. If we increase labour costs, we're going to have increased inflation. Also, more people are expecting inflation to increase. I don't think anyone buys the transitory narrative. I never did. Back in April 2020, I was telling you that wasn't going to happen. It hasn't happened. And more people are waking up to the fact that this is a real problem. It's going to be sticky for a long time. That actually makes it easier for retailers and industry to pass on higher costs because people are more accepting of it. And that stokes inflation too. And then, as I said, you've now got the union bargaining. We've got nurses and teachers and AMBOs on strike because they want much higher pay increases. They need, according to the ABS's latest figures, an increase of 6.1% just not to go backwards in terms of real purchasing power from their wages. So this idea, this notion that inflation is going to go away suddenly, I don't believe it's right. I think we're in for at least 3 to 5 years of very sticky inflation combined with very low economic growth. It's the worst case scenarios, the sort of thing that was characteristic of the lost generation in Japan back in the 90s. So what does this all mean for your local government? Well, first of all, review those long-term financial plans. I've told you to do so before. I'm still coming across councils that have long-term financial plans with employee costs rising by 2.5% for the next 3 or 4 years each year. It's not going to happen. When new EBAs are negotiated, there's no way in the world they're going to be negotiated at 2.5%. I would be very much surprised if the unions negotiating these things right at this moment in some states would be willing to look at anything less than 6%, given the print that came out yesterday. Rate caps, they haven't kept up with inflation. It's not the fault of the independent bodies doing these rate caps, the ESC and IPART. I'm not blaming them. I actually think they both do a very good job, given the legislation they've got and given the processes and methodologies they're stuck with. But the methodologies and the legislation wasn't written for a high inflation and increasing inflation environment. And what that means is that your rate caps are likely to be far lower than the real increase to your costs this year, of course, and also next year and perhaps the year after as this inflation remains sticky. That is a real problem. That's really going to put the squeeze on your financial sustainability. It means more councils are going to have to be looking seriously at adjusting fees and charges and looking seriously at special rate variations. In particular, we need to think about what rate increases are in real terms. So, for instance, in New South Wales, 0.7% was the increase for this coming financial year. Inflation is going to be at least 6.1%. By the end of the financial year, we'll be well into the 7s, 8s. So in real terms, your rate revenue is going back by 6 or 7%. Now, think about it also from the ratepayer's perspective. If they're on a welfare benefit or if they are working, it's likely that their incomes are going to go up by something around inflation. For instance, welfare is linked to CPI, so pensioners' incomes will be going up by 6.1% or so. Their rates are only going up by 0.7%. So what that means is, in real terms, we've given them a discount on their rates. Now, how councils expect to stay financially sustainable in that sort of environment is beyond me. We need to do some serious work, which is why I'm starting a short course shortly, which I'll announce on this channel, about financial sustainability, because there's a lot of work to do if our local governments are going to survive this once-in-a-generation financial sustainability crunch. So I hope this channel has opened your eyes to the problem of inflation, that you're now understanding that a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out about transitory and that we're going to peak shortly and all these things, it's not going to happen. I wish it would, but any bona fide expert, economic expert, will tell you it's extremely unlikely. Now, one of the things that's frustrating me is I can't get this message out to enough councillors and senior decision makers. As a result, councils are not taking into account the full impacts of inflation on their forward planning. That's going to have significant implications and harm for their council and their community. I want to get this message out. To do that, I need your help, each one of you. Send this video to one of your councillors, to your GM, to your Chief Financial Officer, I don't mind who, to anyone you know that's in a position to make decisions, so that we can get the message out, we can get people talking and thinking about the real and significant challenges facing all of us. I'm only here to help. That's all I want to do. If you can use this video to help anyone in any way, do so with my blessing. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.